Mysterious man in the forest. I grew up in a quiet neighborhood, right across from a dead-end street. Behind that dead end was a dense forest stretching for miles. As a child, the forest was an adventurous world, thick with trees and winding paths. I often rode my bike into the woods, relishing the short downhill before immersing myself in nature. It was a routine, something that made me feel safe. But one day, something happened that changed my perception of that forest forever. It was an afternoon. I was cycling when something caught my attention in the distance. Just inside the trees, I saw a man. He was pacing back and forth, his movements frantic, as if he were trying to make a decision. At first, I didn't think much of it. I had seen people walking near the woods before, but something about this man felt off. The man was wearing a black raincoat. His hood was pulled down, so I could see his face clearly. He was middle-aged, balding, and looked as if he hadn't slept in days. From my position, it seemed he was talking to himself. His lips moved quickly, though I couldn't make out what he was saying. The feeling of unease grew stronger. Distracted, I didn't notice the parked car in front of me until it was too late. My bike skidded to a stop just shy of the car's rear, causing me to lose my balance. I fell to the ground, but fortunately, I wasn't hurt. I quickly picked up my bike, hoping no one saw my clumsiness. But then, I saw him again. I crouched behind a nearby car, peeking out just enough to keep an eye on the man. He had stopped. He stood still, staring in my direction, and the bubbling unease turned into sheer terror. Then, I noticed something glinting in his hand. It caught the light with every movement he made. Squinting, I realized it was a knife. Not just any knife, but one with dark red stains on the blade. My breath caught in my throat. I didn't know what to do. Should I run? Call for help? My body felt frozen in fear. Panic surged within me. I crouched behind the car, my mind swirling. Finally, I peered out from behind the vehicle. He was still there, staring. And then, without warning, he let out a horrific scream. The scream echoed, and I held my breath as I forced myself to shrink further behind the car, desperately hoping he wouldn't find me. I dared not move, fearing any sound might reveal my hiding place. I peeked through the tree just enough to see him stop, alert, looking around. Then, in a sudden, chilling moment, he turned and bolted toward the forest. For a moment, I thought I was safe, but just as I began to relax, I started to stand up, and then I froze. I noticed something I hadn't seen before. The man wasn't alone. He was no longer pacing. Instead, he had grabbed a man who looked dazed, as if he didn't understand what was happening. The man in the raincoat had tied the stranger's hands behind his back. Before I could fully comprehend what I was seeing, he started dragging the man deeper into the woods. My fear turned into horror. What was he planning to do? I crouched down, gripping the edge of the car, too scared to move but unable to look away. I knew I had to follow him. Though I was terrified, something inside me urged that if I didn't do something, no one would know what happened to that man. I couldn't let that happen. I waited until the man in the raincoat disappeared into the darkness before I quietly slipped out of the car. I left my bike behind, tiptoeing toward the trees. I continued on, carefully crouching low and silent, following the faint sound of footsteps crunching leaves and twigs ahead. The forest grew darker as I ventured deeper, the canopy overhead blocking out the sunlight. Suddenly, I reached a small clearing. I hid behind a thick tree, cautiously peeking out. He had forced the man to the ground, tightly binding his legs with a length of rope. He was mumbling to himself, his voice rising and falling in agitation. I sensed that the man was nearly unconscious, motionless and unresponsive as if he had been drugged. I fumbled with my phone, my hands shaking as I quietly called the police, whispering my location and describing what I was seeing. The police were on their way. But as I crouched there, the man suddenly stopped what he was doing. He stiffened, standing upright as if he sensed something was wrong. Did he hear me? Before I could react, he spun around, scanning the trees. His eyes were wild, and in a moment of horror, I thought he had spotted me. He gripped the knife tightly. Then, without warning, he charged toward the edge of the clearing, closer to where I was hiding. I pressed myself against the tree, nearly holding my breath. My heart raced so fast I thought it might burst. The footsteps grew louder. Just as he passed, a distant sound shattered the tension. Sirens, police cars blaring in the distance. His head snapped toward the sound, and instantly, he bolted, disappearing into the woods. I stood frozen in place, too frightened to move until I heard the police finally arriving. Their flashlights pierced the darkness, and I rushed out of my hiding spot, waving my arms to signal them. They dashed past me toward the clearing where the kidnapped man lay on the ground, still bound, but alive. The police quickly freed him and searched the area, but the man in the raincoat was gone. They searched for hours, combing through the forest, but he seemed to have vanished into thin air. The officers escorted me home, asking me numerous questions, but my mind was elsewhere. Thoughts kept drifting back to the woods, to the man in the raincoat. He had escaped. I couldn't shake the feeling that he would return. But then, a few days later, I heard the news. The man had been caught. The police didn't take long to trace his whereabouts. They found him hiding in a dilapidated cabin deep in the woods, not far from where the abduction occurred. A wave of relief washed over me. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. The shadows in my room no longer felt frightening. I knew the man was behind bars, and I was safe. But even though the immediate danger had passed, the memory of that day would never leave me. The man in the raincoat, the glint of the knife, the screams. Those images would haunt me forever. The forest, once a place of adventure, had become a site of nightmares. And even with the man caught, I knew I would never be the same again. The Echo of the Hunter. It was an afternoon. Leo had been restless all day, so he decided to take Max for a walk to a nearby field. It was spacious, airy, and peaceful. However, as they ventured deeper into the field, Leo started hearing strange noises. At first, it sounded like someone groaning, but he ignored it. Shortly after, a figure emerged from the trees. A man wearing a long black coat. Leo wondered who would wear a long coat in such hot weather. For some reason, he had a bad feeling. He quickly hid behind a tree, hoping the man hadn't seen him. He crouched down and commanded his dog to stay quiet. Thankfully, Max was always an obedient pup. The man lingered for a moment, but eventually walked away. A few minutes later, Leo could no longer hear his footsteps. He thought he was safe, but just as he started to leave with his dog, Leo heard that eerie groaning sound again behind him. At first, Leo hesitated, but he slowly turned around to see what was happening. He wished no one would ever have to experience something like this, because what he saw at that moment would become the worst nightmare of his life. He was there, standing still, staring at Leo. But this time, he wasn't alone. Beside him was a woman. Her clothes were torn and stained with something dark, something Leo didn't want to think about. She was holding a knife. Her eerie smile twisted in a way that made her look completely insane.
Max, run!
Leo turned and sprinted away. He was halfway through the field when, in his frantic escape, he tripped and fell to the ground. Pain shot through his knee as he hit the ground and skidded forward. The woman's laughter echoed behind him. As he tried to get up, he realized his foot had been impaled by a shard of glass from a broken beer bottle. But there was no time. He summoned all his strength and yanked it out. It was difficult to stand and run. Leo struggled to crawl forward, knowing they had surely seen him and would catch up in no time. The woman got closer.
Leave me alone.
He screamed at them, hoping someone would hear his cries for help, but there was no one around. Max, Leo's dog, stood in front of him and began growling at the woman. Just as she moved to strike, Max lunged and sank his teeth into her leg, making her scream in agony. In retaliation, she threw his dog to the ground, injuring it severely. An uncontrollable rage surged within Leo. He got up and saw that she was wounded at the hip, so he lunged at her, causing her immense pain. But before Leo could catch his breath, a sharp pain shot through his spine. As Leo collapsed to the ground, he saw the man standing behind him. The man had stabbed him, making Leo fall, gasping for air as the world spun around him. Leo thought he was about to die, and in those final moments before closing his eyes, a gunshot rang out beside him. It was Leo's neighbor. He was holding a hunting rifle and had shot the man in the hand, making him scream in pain. Later, the neighbor told Leo that he had been out hunting and, upon reaching the field, had heard him. His hunting dogs had charged at the man and bitten him. The neighbor then rushed to help Leo stand up, but Leo insisted that he help his dog first instead of him. Then he finally passed out. When Leo woke up, he was in the hospital with his neighbor standing beside him. He told Leo that his dog had been taken to the vet and had miraculously survived. The man who attacked Leo was arrested and sent to a psychiatric hospital, but the woman didn't survive due to excessive blood loss. It turned out that they were dangerous criminals who had escaped from the mental institution together. Later, my neighbor lost his right to own firearms because he had shot someone, but he didn't care. He said he had done the right thing to save lives. Leo also felt incredibly lucky to be alive. The intruder and courage. Nicky recalled when he was 9 years old. His parents adopted a dog, wanting him to grow up with a companion to help him learn boundaries and discipline, as well as have a playmate. The dog's name was Charlie, a golden retriever. One night, Nicky woke up past midnight and noticed that Charlie had jumped off the bed and was whining at the door. Nicky got up and went downstairs with Charlie. As he walked through the living room, he felt something pass by him that he couldn't even recognize. Nicky led Charlie out into the backyard and stood by the door, waiting for Charlie to quickly finish and come back inside. But when Charlie came back inside, he turned toward the garage door, walked over, and began sniffing intensely. Soon, Charlie's usual curiosity shifted to something else. He began whining, pacing, and scratching at the door more aggressively, finally looking back at Nicky. Nicky hesitated, but Charlie wouldn't stop. Finally, Nicky opened the door and turned on the light. When the lights came on, there was a man wearing a black mask and dressed in all black, trying to break into Nicky's dad's Mercedes. Beneath him was a black bag full of stolen items. The man turned, startled by the light. Charlie immediately began barking, his deep, ferocious growls echoing through the garage. Nicky screamed for his parents, but within moments, the man reacted quickly, rushing over to grab him and cover his mouth. Charlie barked even louder, his desperation clear as he tried to protect Nicky. "Quiet," the man hissed, dragging Nicky toward the car. Charlie lunged, but the man kicked him out the door, sending him sprawling to the ground. His whimpers filled Nicky with heartbreak. Then the thief threw Nicky hard to the ground, leaving him weak and powerless. He leaned down, threatening him to stay quiet or else. After a moment, Charlie was on the other side of the door, barking again. Meanwhile, the man turned his attention back to the car, using a metal tool to try and pry the lock. Nicky sat frozen, trembling as Charlie's relentless barking continued. Moments later, the door burst open, and Nicky's parents rushed in with Charlie. Nicky's father's face contorted with anger as he took in the scene. "Let my son go," he shouted. The man turned around, grabbed Nicky, and put him in a chokehold. Nicky's father froze, and his face shifted from anger to immediate panic. It wasn't clear why until Nicky realized there was a knife pressed against his neck. The man demanded his parents step back, hand over the car keys, and let him drive away, or else he'd hurt the boy. Nicky's mother tightly held onto Charlie's collar, trying to restrain him as the dog growled and struggled against her grip. "Get the keys," Nicky's father said, his voice tense with fear. Nicky's mother turned toward the house, but her grip on Charlie slipped. The dog broke free and charged toward Nicky. The thief removed the knife from Nicky's neck, and the boy instinctively knew he would point it at Charlie. Acting on instinct, Nicky grabbed the knife and pulled it toward himself, the blade slicing through his fingers in agonizing pain. Charlie lunged forward. His jaws tore through the man's pants and clamped tightly onto his leg, causing him to scream in pain. Nicky's father immediately charged at the thief, pulling Nicky and Charlie away from him. Before the thief could react, his protective instincts took over, and he pinned the intruder to the ground, knocking him unconscious. It wasn't until Nicky's mother intervened that everything finally settled. Nicky could barely recall what happened next. All he knew was that the thief spent a long time in the hospital before being taken into custody. Nicky was also relieved that everyone, including Charlie, escaped without serious injury. Even though Charlie was older, he had proven his boundless love and loyalty to Nicky and the family. Hide and seek in an abandoned house. Today, I decided to ignore my parents' warnings and meet up with my friends to play hide and seek in the old abandoned house near the woods. I remember everything clearly: the musty air, the creaking floors, and the thrill that washed over me as we sneaked into the dilapidated building. Jack, Rian, Lexi, and I. We loved adventure and the adrenaline rush, but nothing could compare to the mystery of that house. The house was surrounded by barbed wire, with the gate tightly locked, but we found a small hole in the wall, hidden behind overgrown grass, just big enough for us to crawl through one by one. As soon as I stepped inside, I felt something was off, but I couldn't pinpoint what it was. We decided to play hide and seek. It was my turn to seek, so I closed my eyes and started counting. The others scattered throughout the house, laughing, their footsteps echoing through the empty rooms.
98, 99, 100.
I opened my eyes and immediately went searching for my friends. It didn't take long to find Lexi and Rian, but Jack was different. He was always better at hiding. I searched every nook and cranny, every room, until I caught a glimpse of a shadow darting by.
Got you, Jack.
I mumbled and ran after him. But something was strange. The shadow seemed faster, slipping around corners as if leading me on. My excitement turned into doubt and fear. No matter how close I thought I was, the shadow always evaded me, disappearing just as I was about to catch up. Not long after, Jack finally came out of the master bedroom, scratching his head. He apologized, saying he had hidden in the closet and fallen asleep. But my heart skipped a beat. Who had I been chasing? I gasped and told Jack and the others what had happened. They laughed, teasing me for trying to scare them. Determined to prove it, I convinced them to play again. We played again. I resumed searching, but soon that uneasy feeling returned. The house was too quiet, too still. My friends were nowhere to be found, and the more I searched, the more convinced I became that something terrible had happened. Then I saw it again. A hand reached out from behind a wall, waving at me from a distance. Suddenly, I noticed a pair of shoes on the ground, just like Lexi's. I called out, but she didn't answer. The hand waved at me again from afar. I moved closer, but as I approached, the hand disappeared. I chased after it, only to find another arm waving from the top of the stairs. No matter how fast I ran, I couldn't find anyone. Then I saw a face that looked like Rion's in the window. He stood still, staring at me with wide, terrified eyes. I knew something was wrong. I pressed my face against the window to get a closer look, and it was a child, about our age, but with a wrinkled, aged face, eerie and twisted. His clothes were stained with red patches, and I froze when I saw him holding something, a long, rusted, sharp metal rod. Before I could move, he spoke in a chilling voice.
"Oh, you found me. Now it's my turn."
He grinned widely, then began counting.
1, 2, 3.
Panic surged through me. I didn't take the steps one by one. I bolted down the stairs as fast as I could. His laughter echoed behind me. I remembered the secret closet Jack had hidden in earlier. In desperation, I dove inside, pulling the door shut and holding my breath as I listened. I didn't dare make a sound. I squeezed my eyes shut, praying he would leave. I must have passed out from lack of oxygen. When I woke up, I was in the hospital. It turned out my parents and the police had been searching for us all night, and my friends had managed to escape to alert them. Later, we found out that he was the escaped mental patient the police had been searching for. Because he was as short as a child, he had crawled through the hole in the back wall and turned the abandoned house into his temporary hideout. His favorite thing to do was play hide and seek with children, and then harm them in various ways. The most terrifying part, the police still haven't caught him. The girl in the red dress. The house we moved into after my father's death wasn't anything special, just another old, quiet mansion in the suburbs, far removed from our old life. It had been abandoned for a while, and it was clear why the rent was suspiciously cheap. Overgrown grass and neglected old furniture gave it a forgotten feel. But to my mother, it was home. I was 20 years old, and I dealt with my grief in my own way. Not long after we moved in, I began noticing small things slowly emerging in the house. But the sounds of whispers, creaking noises made me uneasy and anxious living there. It started with scratching, soft, persistent, on the other side of my bathroom door. At first, I ignored it, hoping it was just my imagination. But night after night, the sound continued. Then came the knocking, sometimes at the front door, sometimes at the window. It always came around midnight, but no one could possibly be there. We kept the gate locked, and no one could enter the yard. Yet the knocking continued. I told my mother. She dismissed it, saying, "It's just an old house." But I knew the house wasn't just old, it was holding on to something. One night, I invited my friend Joe to stay over. We were sitting in my room talking about school when we heard voices coming from the kitchen. It was well past midnight. Everyone should have been asleep. Out of curiosity, we pressed our ears against the door. A conversation was happening just outside, but we couldn't make out a single word. We tiptoed into the hallway, but the kitchen was empty, dark, cold. We checked the entire house, nothing. Everyone was asleep. The voices were gone, leaving only a chilling silence. A few weeks later, my brother decided to test his luck. He and his friends thought it would be fun to play with a Ouija board in my room while I was away. They thought it was just a silly, superstitious game. At first, nothing happened. They laughed awkwardly, asking questions but receiving no response. Then one of them froze. His face turned pale, his body stiff like a statue. Without a word, he bolted from the room, his friends close behind, terror in their eyes. Once outside, the guy finally spoke. He had seen her, a girl, standing at the bathroom door, wearing a red dress, her hand on the knob, staring at them. He said she couldn't have been older than 13, and her eyes were filled with something he couldn't describe. Fear, anger, curiosity. When my brother told me this, I thought he was just trying to scare me. Of course, I didn't believe him. Why would I? I had never seen her. But the story haunted me, lodged deep in my mind like a splinter I couldn't remove. Later, I had a birthday party at a friend's house. Jordan, a friend of mine, got drunk, so I took him to my room and told him to stay there until he sobered up. He collapsed onto the bed and fell asleep. Later, I went to check on him. The room was pitch black, with only a faint light coming from the bathroom. Jordan wasn't in bed. He was sitting at the bathroom door, one leg in, one leg out, talking to no one. I tapped his shoulder. He jumped, then looked at me, confused. He glanced back at the bathroom, then at me again. He mumbled, "I thought I was talking to you, but I just laughed it off, thinking he was too drunk." The next day, he explained, I was teasing him, but he was dead serious. In his drunken state, he had seen a girl in the bathroom. She was wearing a red dress, standing in the middle of the bathroom, asking why he was there. And when I walked in, she disappeared. It didn't stop there. The hauntings, the knocking, the voices continued. My fear grew as one by one. People close to me began talking about an entity that I had never seen in this house. I left my room and went to talk to my mother. While we were on vacation, my aunt and uncle stayed at the house. When we returned, they were sleeping on the living room floor, terror etched across their faces. They said the shower in my room kept turning on by itself, and the radio too, making it impossible for them to stay inside. My mother had no choice but to confront the landlady, who initially denied everything. But the truth came out. The landlady's mother had lived in this house as a teenager with her twin sister, who had ended her life in the bathroom wearing a red dress. It was all true. The red dress, the girl, the spirit trapped within the walls of our home. I didn't know how I was going to convince my mother to leave, but since we were struggling financially, it was piling up, so I had no choice but to stay in the house a little longer. The girl in the red dress. The days that followed were tense, filled with a thick sense of unease that blanketed the house. My mother decided we should move out and find a new place to live. However, things weren't settled yet, and we faced difficulties. So we had to stay in the house a little longer to figure things out. That was our last night in the house. I couldn't sleep. The woman in the red dress kept lingering, haunting my mind. I lay in bed, wrestling with these thoughts until I couldn't take it anymore. I needed to see the house one last time. I got out of bed and walked through the dark hallway. I headed to the bathroom, where it all began. As I reached the bathroom, a chill filled the air, heavy with tension. I hesitated at the doorway, feeling something preventing me from turning on the light. I stepped inside, the cold tiles pressing against my feet, and then I felt another presence in the room. Fear gripped me tightly. Her presence was so strong, I could feel her breath on the back of my neck. I didn't dare turn around, didn't dare move. As I stood in the darkness of the bathroom, a cold hand rested on my shoulder, and a flood of images of the girl in the red dress filled my mind. It was as if she was showing me her story. Buried for decades, the girl, now known to me as Maria, had lived in this house long ago. She was intelligent and talented, but her life was full of suffering because her twin sister was always more favored for her beauty. Everything about Maria seemed overshadowed by her sister. As the years passed, she felt trapped in her own home, living in her sister's shadow, who seemed to have everything Maria longed for. The breaking point came when her sister fell in love with a man. They planned to marry, with their parents' blessing. But Maria, who had quietly loved the same man, was devastated. Even her own chance at happiness was taken from her. Unable to bear the pain, Maria spent much of her time in the small bathroom, It became her sanctuary, the only place where she could escape the suffocating presence of her sister, and the life she felt was never meant for her. One night, overwhelmed by sorrow and loneliness, she made a tragic decision. She thought that leaving this world would make things better, and she ended her life in that very bathroom. Her sister, consumed by guilt, left the house in grief, but Maria's spirit remained bound to the house, trapped in the place where she had taken her own life. As the images faded, I understood the profound despair of Maria. Her spirit had lingered all these years, waiting for someone to recognize her pain. But now, as I stood there in the bathroom, I felt a strange connection with her. The sorrow that had once filled the room was replaced with an intense urge to help her find peace. I whispered, trembling, calling Maria's name. I told her, "I understand what you've been through. You don't deserve to be so alone. I'll leave, and you don't need to stay here anymore. It's time to let go and find peace." In that moment, the cold hand on my shoulder lifted. The oppressive air slowly began to ease. For the first time since we moved in, it felt as if the house itself had released its hold on her after all this time. That night, I slept in my bed without fear, no knocking, scratching, or voices. Everything had disappeared. Perhaps she had finally left, freeing herself from the chains she had once forged. The next morning, as we packed the last of our belongings into the car, I looked back at the house one last time. The sun shone brightly, casting a warm glow over the old, stately mansion. As we drove away, I felt that Maria had found the peace she longed for. The house was just a house now, no longer haunted by the sorrow of the past. And though I know I will never return, I will always remember Maria, the poor girl in the red dress, who finally found the freedom she had been denied in life. The neighbor's dark secret. I often have insomnia, so I often choose to stand at the balcony door, looking out at the quiet neighborhood. I live in a really isolated neighborhood. The houses around here are not right next to each other, although I do have a neighbor who has a fence that I can see over if I stand on the balcony. I'm not being nosy or anything, but that night, I was looking into his yard. I've never met him because that neighbor just moved in, but I assume he lives alone because there's only one black truck parked in his yard. Today, I continued to go to the balcony and look at his yard. The truck had been missing for a week. I played the game of observing the truck at night and theorizing about its purpose, even though that was none of my business. Suddenly, one day, I saw him. My neighbor walked out of the house, dragging something. It looks like it's a long, black bag. It looked quite heavy, and it took him a lot of strength to pull it. On the ground, there is a leak of something that looks thick. He struggled to lift it, then pulled it toward the truck, sliding the side door open. He stuffed the bag into the trunk before driving away, then glanced around as if checking to make sure no one was watching. I stood there, my mind spinning. I couldn't ignore it anymore. So I called the police. They arrived quickly and checked around his property. I stayed, watching from the window as they spoke to him, but then his demeanor was completely different. He led the police to one of his bags, opened it, and inside was meat. He started pointing at his dog, which barked eagerly as he lifted it, filled with excitement. The screams, he claimed, were just him rehearsing a scene from his favorite TV show, and he did it every night. The police found nothing else. To protect my identity, the police came inside and spoke privately about me calling them. They warned me. They said if I continued calling without evidence, I could be charged with privacy violation and harassment. When they left, my neighbor came over, placing a hand on my shoulder. With a friendly smile, he said, "Let's not let little misunderstandings get out of hand, all right?" It felt like a warning. I told myself I was overreacting. Maybe he really was just an odd guy, with strange habits. Every night, I hear faint, muffled, haunting screams. I tell myself it's just him rehearsing, as he said. Then one evening, he showed up at my door holding a cake. He told me it was his birthday and gave me the cake to clear up any unnecessary misunderstandings between us. Was he smiling? I wasn't sure if it was my mind playing tricks, but I felt like he was giving a sinister smile behind my back, waiting for something. As I closed the door, a wave of fear came over me. I took the cake into the kitchen. I placed the cake on the table, not daring to eat it, and just stared at it for a while. I considered eating it, dismissing my paranoia, and slowly brought it to my mouth. But then, something like an instinct told me not to. I put it down, reminding myself to stay alert. Thinking of him preparing it, watching me, knowing I'd eat it. It was truly horrifying. I grabbed the cake, took it to the trash bin behind the house, and threw it away. I didn't care if I was being unreasonable. I'd rather be safe than sorry. Early the next morning, when I went out to take out the trash behind the house, something caught my eye. There, beside the trash bin, was a small mouse, dead. Its tiny body lay still, right next to where I had thrown the cake the night before. A thin trail of cake crumbs led from the cake to the mouse. The mouse had eaten the cake and died. His depravity was beyond imagining. The cake was not a gift, it was a warning. From that moment, I started watching. Every sound, every strange occurrence, every word from my neighbor. Now I knew he wasn't just a harmless eccentric. He was hiding something dark. Everything started again when I walked past my neighbor's house. My steps slowed as I glanced at his front door, catching sight of a hand pressed against the glass, moving frantically. The glass was old and foggy. I saw someone inside, exhaling and writing help on the dust-covered window. For a second, I turned away, rushing back home. I didn't want to know what was happening behind that door. Back in bed, I couldn't sleep. The image of that pleading face, the desperate scrawl on the window, kept replaying in my mind. The sounds, the black bag, the screams. If I reported this to the police, I knew he'd find a way to cover it up, like he always did. Without evidence, everything would be pointless. I needed a clear and specific plan. I decided to reach out to my friend. I met my friend at the local cafe and explained everything, detailing the strange events and horrific scenes. He looked at me, skeptical, but didn't dismiss it right away. We had known each other for so long, neither of us wanted to believe this was happening. Then he suggested gathering photo and video evidence using advanced technology to avoid detection. I had to do whatever it took to prove my words. Neither of us could imagine what we were about to do next. But I promised him that we would only collect evidence and leave quickly and discreetly. The next morning, I put on a plumber's uniform and a fake mustache, mentally preparing for my decision. I approached my neighbor's door, disguised as a plumber. He opened it, eyeing me strangely, scrutinizing. He glanced at my house, then back at me, asking, "Nick, is that you?" I froze for a moment. I began faking my voice, using a different tone to deceive him, explaining I was sent to check and fix the city's main water pipes. At first, he seemed suspicious and told me to wait a moment before closing the door. I stood outside, not knowing what he was doing inside, waiting and adjusting my glasses. But eventually, he acted friendly and allowed me inside. As I entered, the house was much tidier than I had expected, and nothing suggested he was a murderer. As I pretended to inspect the pipes under his kitchen sink, he stayed close, following me throughout the house. My every move was under his watch. I hadn't anticipated this, His presence was a constant reminder that one wrong move could be my last. I racked my brain for a way to separate myself from him. Then, an idea struck. I asked him to let me check the pipes in the basement, explaining that I needed to inspect the pipes there, adding, "If you come with me, you'll need to be careful. A broken pipe could be very dangerous and make things worse." He hesitated, but finally, he allowed me to go down to the basement alone. I watched his shadow disappear into the darkness. I turned my attention to the house, moving quietly, looking through every corner, hoping to find something out of place. And then I saw it, an edge jutting out along a wall, as if something was being hidden. My fingers brushed along the edge, feeling the rough texture beneath my hand. With a gentle push, the panel creaked open, releasing a foul stench that made me nauseous. I hesitated. Well, would I pro? The smell was nearly unbearable, but curiosity overpowered my fear. I cautiously stepped closer, peering inside. There, in the dim light, I saw a long streak on the floor leading to black bundles that were oozing blood. Then I saw dozens of bodies, skeletal remains intertwined with decomposing corpses. Just as I was about to turn and escape, a cold hand gripped my shoulder. "Hello, my neighbor," a familiar voice whispered in my ear, full of malice. I felt the pressure of his grip tightening, but before I could react, he shoved me forward, standing in front of the door, blocking my only exit. His eyes showed satisfaction. I reached for my phone and pressed the emergency alarm button, just as my friend and I had planned beforehand. He quickly snatched the phone from my hand. Then there was a crackling sound as he crushed it underfoot. I realized I was truly trapped. The police stormed into the house unexpectedly. My friend, true to his word, had taken action when he received my emergency signal. He had told me beforehand that he would alert a trusted officer in case anything happened. The neighbor began to flee, but during the pursuit, he couldn't escape our plan. He was caught and couldn't deny the overwhelming evidence. When I handed over all the footage and he was taken into custody, I lay in the hospital thinking about what I'd been through. I had come closer to death than I ever imagined. I regretted nothing. Haunting delivery trip. I was working for a food delivery platform on weekends to make some extra money. Between my main job and this side gig, I often felt exhausted. It was past 9 p.m. when I started my shift, picking up small orders and delivering them to random houses. After my first delivery, I drove around the area for a while, waiting for something to come through. 20 minutes passed with nothing. Just as I was about to give up, my phone buzzed with an order for just 1 tacos and a drink. I confirmed the order and headed to the restaurant to pick it up. After grabbing the order, I began the 10-minute drive to the customer's house. It was a normal neighborhood, nothing unusual. As I approached a red light, I noticed a pickup truck stop next to me. Instinctively, I glanced over. The guy in the truck was leaning out of the window, staring straight at my car. I looked away when the light turned green and pressed the gas. I glanced in my rearview mirror. The truck was now in my lane, driving a short distance behind me. As I approached the neighborhood where I was making the delivery, the truck was still behind me. Was he following me? The route was mostly straight, so I wasn't sure if he was just heading in the same direction. I tried to stay calm, but the moment I turned into the neighborhood, I knew. The pickup truck turned in too. Maybe he lived here, I thought. I continued driving through the quiet suburban streets, following the GPS until I reached the final road, a dead end. I braked and parked on the side of the road near the house number I had to deliver to. The truck followed and parked behind me. I sat there, frozen, trying to come up with a plan for the worst-case scenario. What was this guy doing? Was he really following me? I glanced at my phone and saw a message from the customer asking, When will the food arrive? Could it be the guy in the truck? Was he the customer waiting for me to step out? I felt more trapped than ever. The man got out of the truck. My heart pounded as I watched him slowly approach my car. He stopped right by my trunk, his face partially hidden in the shadows. Then, out of nowhere, he grabbed something like a metal rod and slammed it into my rear windshield. The glass shattered around me. I screamed and, without thinking, instinctively slammed my foot on the gas. The man jumped onto the back of my car, nearly lying flat as he tried to crawl through the shattered window. I swerved sharply, making a U-turn, and felt him fall off the car. My hands trembled as I maneuvered between the trucks. In the rearview mirror, I saw him stumbling in the street as I sped away. My hands shaking, I picked up the phone to call the police. By the time the police arrived, the man had vanished. All they found were shards of glass scattered across the road. They searched the area, but he was gone. I stood staring at the cracks in my shattered windshield, and memories of the terrifying experience replayed in my mind. I was lucky to have escaped, but deep down I still felt uneasy because he was still out there, haunting delivery trip. It's been almost a month since that horrifying night. I haven't driven for the delivery app since then. Every time I think about driving, the echo of shattering glass floods my mind. I try to tell myself it was just an incident, that I was unlucky. There were no witnesses. The police reassured me they'd find him, saying it was probably just a disturbed person trying to scare me. But I couldn't shake the feeling that there had to be some reason he was following me. I decided to try driving again. I needed the money, and I couldn't let fear control my life. I told myself that this time I'd be careful and avoid driving too late at night, and I'd stay away from isolated neighborhoods. As I got into the car, that familiar fear washed over me. My hands were sweaty. I tried to close my eyes, take a deep breath, and turn the key in the ignition. Things started off fine. I was careful and checked my mirrors more frequently. But as the sun set, my phone buzzed with an order that sent a chill down my spine. 1 taco and a drink. A simple order, just like that night. I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the accept button. I figured it was just a coincidence, so I accepted the order. A light drizzle had begun. The drive to Taco felt eerie, as if I was retracing the same steps as that night. I picked up the order and placed it on the passenger seat. As I drove to the delivery address, waves of anxiety hit me. The house was in a different neighborhood, but each turn felt strangely familiar. When I parked at the curb, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. The headlights of a car behind me suddenly flicked on. I looked, it was a truck, and it looked just like the one from that night. Panic set in as the truck rolled closer, its blinding headlights on full beam. The truck parked right behind me, as if waiting for me to make a move. I tried to text my customer, but I was shaking so badly I couldn't type properly, wasting precious time. Suddenly, a notification popped up on my phone. Customer, when will my order arrive? I couldn't believe it and dropped my phone right then. It was happening again. Could he have been waiting for this moment to get revenge? I couldn't go through this again. I had to act. I pressed the gas, moving my car to another spot. The truck slowed down behind me, its headlights glaring blindingly in my rearview mirror, causing me to squint. Suddenly, the truck surged forward, crashing into the back of my car. The impact jerked me forward, my chest slamming into the steering wheel. Pain shot through my ribs as I gasped, trying to catch my breath. I pressed the gas harder, but the rain had made the road slick, so I had to maintain control to avoid crashing. Panic hit me as he pulled up alongside, rolled down his window, and gave me a sinister smile. Another slam. The back of my car crumpled, and I felt something wet trickling down my head. My head had been injured, and was bleeding from the impact against the window when he rammed me again. I braked hard, dazed, my vision blurring from the blood running down my face and the sharp pain in my side. But I couldn't give up. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911 for help. I could see his silhouette through the rain, stepping out of his truck. I refused to give up, flooring the gas and driving blindly. My car slammed into a tree. Desperate to survive, I fumbled for the door handle, trying to get out before he got too close. In the distance, I could hear him screaming angrily. I forced myself to run, sprinting toward the woods at the edge of the road. Suddenly, I tripped. My ankle twisted and sharp pain shot up my leg. I couldn't move. He was almost on top of me, his shadow looming as I tried to crawl toward the edge of the road. I turned to face him. He raised the crowbar high above his head, ready to strike, and I screamed. But then, the sound of police sirens cut through the quiet rain. He froze, trying to run, but it was too late. The police used a taser and tackled him to the ground. He was finally caught. I fainted, slowly losing consciousness. Paramedics loaded me into an ambulance, and a wave of relief washed over me. The nightmare was finally over. The Uber driver's nightmare trip. The Uber nightmare, it was just another night on the job. Not that I enjoyed these late shifts, but my rent was due in a week, and I'd already spent all my money on new tires and an oil change. I'd been driving every night. I really hated driving at night. The fog, the isolation, it always gave me chills. I had just dropped off a drunk couple from a bar when my phone buzzed, signaling the next ride. As I drove to pick up my next passenger, I noticed it was the exact spot where I had picked up the couple just half an hour earlier. I figured it was just a strange coincidence. I stopped at the pickup location but didn't see anyone. The fog had thickened, as if swallowing the entire street. I honked the horn and glanced around to see if anyone was coming, but there was no one. I quickly checked my phone to confirm the pickup spot on the app. Just as I was about to double-check the app, my back door suddenly opened, and my heart nearly jumped out of my chest. I let out a nervous laugh, even feeling a little embarrassed. It was a man. He didn't say a word as he got in and sat down, clutching a brown paper bag tightly. There was something unsettling about the way he held that bag. After a moment, he told me he knew the couple I had just dropped off. Then, he asked me to take him to the same location where I'd dropped them off earlier. I keyed in the address and started driving. A few miles down the road, my phone buzzed, and I nearly jumped. I got a notification from Uber that someone else wanted to be picked up along the way. It was odd, considering it was past 3 in the morning. I arrived at the new pickup location, and she was standing beneath a streetlight, making her easy to spot. She ran toward the passenger seat, and instinctively, I unlocked the door for her to sit up front. With the man in the back seat, I didn't want to take any chances. I turned away and focused on driving. I glanced at her again. There was something about the way she looked at the man in the back seat, as if they shared a connection, but weren't saying it out loud. We drove in silence. I checked the map. All 3 of them were headed to the same address where I'd dropped off the couple earlier. My mind started racing. What's going on? Why is she going there too? Then I curiously asked, "So, do you all know each other?" She smiled, turned to me, and nodded. "Yes," she said with absolute confidence. When we arrived at the address, I noticed all the lights were off. They began walking toward the house, and before leaving, the woman turned back and said, "Just wait here for a minute. We'll be right back." Both disappeared into the darkness. I stared ahead and sat there for a few minutes, wondering for a moment, should I just leave? Suddenly, there was a loud bang on my car window. She yelled, "Please, hurry, hurry. My friend needs help." We need your help to get her to the hospital." I tried to shake off the fear in my mind and got out of the car to follow her. When we reached the door, the man slammed it shut behind me. He shoved me to the ground, and I saw the knife in his hand. The woman's voice changed, her calm demeanor replaced by a cruel laugh. She slowly turned to me and told me to run while laughing maniacally. I crawled as quickly as I could to the dining room, and I couldn't believe my eyes, the couple I had dropped off an hour ago. But they were no longer alive. The man was now behind me. He was so close. I ran as fast as I could. Luckily, he slipped, giving me just enough time to sprint up the stairs. I wedged myself into a closet, trying to suppress my sobs. I wasn't sure how long I could stay hidden. Then I suddenly realized there was a figure, a woman, standing in front of the closet. Perhaps the blood trail on the floor had given me away. I hesitated, but saw she was alone outside. I took a chance, shoved the door open, and knocked her to the ground. I hurried to the window without hesitation. I smashed the glass, breaking it, and climbed out. Pain shot through my arm, but I ignored it. I couldn't go back. I just ran, got into my car, and drove straight to the police station. My efforts paid off. The next morning, investigators uncovered the full extent of the killer's crimes. Dozens of drivers had been lured to their deaths in the same way I had been. They had used ride-sharing services as a cover, abducting innocent victims one by one, all for their dark purposes. This ruthless duo had evaded capture many times, but not this time. They were arrested. I felt incredibly lucky because, as far as I knew, most people didn't survive. The nightmare, it seemed, had finally ended. The price of the silent one. I glanced at the clock. It was past midnight. I thought it was time to head home. I left the lab late one evening after a long day of experiments. The night was dark, the streets deserted, and the cold air biting at anyone daring to venture out. The road was empty, and the only sound was the distant howl of the wind. As I drove, I suddenly noticed something moving by the roadside. A figure, a girl, walking alone in the desolation. She seemed disoriented, wearing a red coat, her head bowed, and her posture rigid, standing out under the dim light. Something about her felt off, so I slowed my car and came to a stop. I asked her if she was okay. "Do you need a ride?" The girl didn't reply. She kept walking, her steps slow, as if she didn't even notice my presence. Finally, the girl stopped, and she slowly turned around. She had a beautiful face, but her skin was deathly pale, with an expression of anguish, as if she had forgotten how to smile forever. She asked for a ride and said she was on her way home. I politely hesitated at first, but then I agreed to give her a ride. I drove along the dark road as the girl sat silently in the back, staring out of the window. As I drove through the town, approaching an old cemetery, the girl's behavior suddenly shifted. She began to grow increasingly agitated. Suddenly, she started clawing at the car window with her nails, screaming hysterically as if she were desperate to escape. She shouted, "Let me out! Let me out!" Panicked and unsure what was happening, I scrambled to unlock the door. She flung the car door open and bolted towards the cemetery. Her speed was unnatural, almost too fast, disappearing into the night. I got out of the car, calling after her, but she was gone, leaving me standing alone in the eerie silence of the darkness. Confused, I drove away, chalking the incident up as nothing more than a strange encounter. A few nights later, I drove home along the same route, but every night, something strange and puzzling happened. I encountered her again, asking for a ride. Each time as we neared the cemetery, she would scream, louder than before, and run into the darkness. It was like a looped tape, ending in terror every single time. My curiosity grew, and I began to wonder if I was witnessing something from another world. After 4 consecutive nights of experiencing the same bizarre encounter, I couldn't ignore her strange, repetitive behavior anymore. I was haunted by thoughts of what might be happening at the cemetery, and the image of her running remained etched in my mind. The next day, I decided to visit the cemetery to investigate. I began noticing the old, weathered gravestones, a strange sensation settling over me as I surveyed the area. After some searching, I stumbled upon a gravestone bearing the name Lydia Ward. What shocked me even more was the image on the grave. It was the girl who had asked for a ride. I was frozen in disbelief. Her date of death was engraved as 7 years ago. A chill ran down my spine as I read the words "killed" in a ritual. My mind began to spiral as the name and face felt eerily familiar. I couldn't shake the memory of another girl named Lydia. She had been killed in a satanic ritual. I realized that I might have been the one who witnessed her death all those years ago. When I was a student, I had taken part in a challenge to prove that demons weren't real and thought I was the only one at the cemetery. But suddenly, I was startled by the sound of a girl screaming. I followed the sound and discovered 3 men torturing a girl. I hid behind a bush to avoid being seen and watched as the men carried out what appeared to be some kind of satanic ritual. When the ritual ended, I thought it was over, or perhaps just a bizarre performance. Then, I saw the men sacrifice the girl, one of them holding a knife, attempting to take her life. I couldn't think of anything. I was terrified and quietly ran away. I acted like a coward, staying silent to avoid getting myself into trouble. My thoughts are now clouded by guilt and confusion. I was one of the last people to see Lydia alive. I feel responsible for not doing more, for not intervening when I saw her that day. I spent the next few days researching Lydia's death. I dug through old police records, spoke to former classmates, and visited the university archives. I discovered that Lydia's death was a tragic and mysterious event. Some students at the school had joined a cult-like group that conducted rituals in the cemetery, and Lydia was their victim. Although the police investigated, no one was convicted. My guilt grew as I realized that I had been there that day but was too afraid to intervene. Perhaps that's why her spirit has come to me. As I dug deeper into everything, I began experiencing strange occurrences. I constantly heard whispers in my home, and at night, Lydia appeared every night, standing at the foot of my bed with her sunken, sorrowful eyes, her mouth whispering softly. My room always felt cold, the air thick and heavy, as if her grief was pressing down on me. I began to wonder if Lydia's spirit was trying to tell me something. Perhaps her murder was tied to a larger conspiracy, and only I could uncover the truth. I returned to the cemetery. I felt her presence guiding me, leading me to a hidden spot behind an old mausoleum. I discovered numerous symbols etched onto the old stone walls and trees surrounding the cemetery. They resembled symbols used in ancient satanic rituals. My hands trembled as I took photos. The cult had used this place. Lydia had died here, sacrificed to summon whatever they worshipped. Piecing together everything I knew, I realized that Lydia's death was only part of a larger ritual that was taking place. The cult had used the lives of innocent people to summon dark forces, and Lydia was the final sacrifice. Overwhelmed by the truth, I knew I couldn't let this mystery remain hidden and unanswered any longer. I finally gathered enough evidence, photos, documents, symbols, to bring to the police and share what I had hidden and discovered. I knew that my actions were the only way to free her soul. The police finally launched a comprehensive investigation into the cult's activities, arresting several former students and members who had participated in the rituals. In the end, justice was served for Lydia, and her soul could finally rest after 7 years of torment. In the final moments, I visited Lydia's grave once more. This time, as I stood before her grave, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. By uncovering the truth, I had redeemed myself, and now I could let go of the guilt that had haunted me for so long. As Rick turned to leave, he glanced back and saw a figure standing in the distance, Lydia's red coat billowing in the wind. He smiled softly, knowing she was no longer trapped, but finally free. The possession of the red dress. Ben, my best friend, and I went to a remote lakeside campground for a quiet weekend of fishing. The night air was cold, peaceful, with only the crackling of the fire and the occasional splash of a fish jumping out of the water. We were enjoying this calm together. I suggested grilling the fish, and Ben agreed to gather firewood. He went to the forest's edge to find some. Along the way, he found a lot of dry branches scattered around, but then he saw something red in the darkness. As he got closer, he discovered a red dress. After a while, Ben returned with a bundle of firewood wrapped in the red dress. He intended to use it to start the fire, but I didn't pay much attention or think twice about using it as kindling. Not long after, we chatted while waiting for the fish to cook, but after a few seconds, Ben's face suddenly changed. When he stopped speaking, he made a strange noise from his throat. His attitude shifted, becoming oddly restless. Ben's eyes grew wild, and he suddenly became aggressively irrational. He grabbed the fish from the fire and started devouring it, even though it was still raw, as if he found it irresistibly delicious. I didn't understand why he was acting like that, but I was concerned the fish wasn't cooked. I decided to stop Ben from eating it all, fearing it might make him sick. Ben suddenly went berserk, yelling at me to give him the fish. That's when I realized something terrible had happened. Ben seemed to have lost his mind and control. Panicking, I had to restrain my friend. Eventually, I managed to calm Ben down, and he fell asleep. I was about to leave, planning to take him to the hospital to make sure he was okay. Since the situation seemed to have passed, I decided to take Ben home. It looked like it might rain, so we quickly left. It started pouring heavily. As I drove back, I couldn't shake the feeling that something dark had been awakened by the red dress. Ben went home to his wife, but things got worse. That night, Ben started sleepwalking, something he had never done before. In the late hours, his wife was awakened by a strange noise. She saw him rummaging through the closet. He kept saying, "Wait for me," throwing clothes around, not responding to his wife, until he found his wife's red dress in the closet. Ben pulled it out and stared at it for a moment, then decided to put it on and went to bed, as if nothing had happened. His wife assumed he was just sleepwalking, so she said nothing. Ben's wife noticed that things were becoming increasingly strange since Ben went fishing with me, so she came to me for help. I returned to the lake, hoping to uncover or find something. I built a large fire to keep wild animals away from the old campsite. I returned to the old campsite. I was shocked to see that the dress was torn and scorched, yet still strangely intact, as if it had been deliberately left there. I realized the rain must have put out the fire that day. I walked through the forest to the places near where we had fished. Then my gaze was drawn to a rope tied to a tree branch, as if marking something. I approached and stumbled upon a corner of a notebook lying on the ground near the base of a tree, as though someone had buried it there. The journal revealed the tragic story of a woman named Elena, who had lived in the forest many years ago. She was known for wearing the same red dress, a gift from her lover. However, her love turned to jealousy and obsession, and after a tragic incident, she was murdered by him. Elena's spirit, bound to the red dress, sought to take the souls of others to keep her company in the afterlife. The dress served as a conduit for the spirit, and those who interacted with it would become vessels for her rage and obsession. I returned to the same spot. Ben was now kneeling at the base of the tree, staring at the scorched red dress. Then he reached for it. Ben suddenly lunged at me, becoming more aggressive like a beast. I struggled to overpower him to get the dress. I tried to wrestle Ben off to get the dress. Desperate, I grabbed the red dress and threw it into the fire I had built earlier. This time, I had to make sure it burned completely. As the dress burned, Ben collapsed to the ground, his face twisted in agony, as if he had just woken up from a terrible nightmare. Ben's eyes were filled with confusion and horror as he stared at the dress still burning. In the days that followed, Ben tried to return to normal life, but he remained haunted by the red dress and the woman in the forest. Every time he saw the color red, he became terrified. After everything that happened, I too was affected by what I had witnessed, but I tried to forget it, believing the worst was finally behind us. Midnight flight. Due to his job, Lucas frequently traveled for business to meet clients. He was sitting alone at the airport, waiting for a late-night flight back to Sydney. The clock showed 1 a.m. The area where he was seated was almost deserted, except for a few scattered passengers. Lucas had his headphones on and was engrossed in his phone. The atmosphere felt strangely empty for such a usually busy airport. At that moment, a flight attendant, a woman in uniform with an eerie, unsettling smile, approached him and gently tapped him on the shoulder.
Sir, your flight is about to depart. I think you missed the announcement.
Lucas glanced around and realized he was the only one left in the waiting area. The elderly couple had already left, and there were no other passengers. His flight was scheduled for 1:30 a.m., but it was already 1:15 a.m. He quickly stood up and thanked her, surprised at how fast time had passed. Lucas got up and began following her. As they walked through the airport, he noticed something odd. She seemed to walk with an uneven gait. Then, he noticed a deep scar on her left leg, and her skin looked unusually pale. She led him onto the plane, and as he stepped inside, he was stunned to see that the entire plane was packed with passengers, none of whom he had noticed or seen in the waiting area. The atmosphere inside the plane was eerily silent, so much so that for a moment, he thought no one was breathing. The passengers sat with their heads bowed, not talking, almost motionless. After boarding, she leaned close and whispered in his ear,
Please take your seat, sir.
If he had been alone, he might have screamed. The cold, chilling breath in her whisper made his ears feel frozen. Lucas went to his seat by the window. As he sat down, he noticed a thin man in formal attire seated next to him, but there was something off about his face. Lucas felt the plane was unusually cold, and soon, a foul stench began to permeate the air around him. Lucas fastened his seatbelt and waited for the plane to take off, but none of the other passengers moved or changed their behavior. They all remained silent and expressionless. He told the man next to him,
It's so cold in here.
The man didn't reply. He just sat there with his head bowed. Lucas thought maybe he was asleep or didn't want to talk. Then all the lights began flickering. Suddenly, the emergency alarm blared, and the plane started shaking violently. Lightning flashed across the sky outside, and a violent jolt caused luggage to fall from the overhead compartments. He screamed, but the man next to him and everyone else showed no signs of panic. They all sat like statues, seemingly indifferent to what was happening. In a panic, Lucas tried to unbuckle his seatbelt, but it was stuck. Desperate, he shouted for help. Then, he turned to the man next to him, saying,
Excuse me, please wake up. This plane is going to crash. Please, we need to do something, or we're all going to die.
As Lucas struggled, the man next to him slowly looked up. His face was horrifying, with one side severely burned and scarred. He smiled, a chilling, terrifying grin, and said,
They're all dead.
The other passengers now revealed grotesque faces. A spine-chilling, sinister laughter erupted from all of them. They began laughing in unison, a shrill, terrifying sound. "Please let me off," he begged. At that moment, his seatbelt came undone, and he ran toward the exit to escape. But the flight attendant suddenly appeared, blocking his path. Her face was now unrecognizable, her body covered in wounds, smeared with blood, and she had a wide, menacing grin. He shoved the flight attendant aside and ran toward the cockpit, hoping to find the pilots. When he opened the door, he was met with a horrifying sight. Both pilots were gone, and everything inside was engulfed in flames. His vision began to blur. His head throbbed, and the faint sound of devilish laughter echoed in his ears.
Sir, are you okay?
The voice startled Lucas awake. It was a security guard at the airport, leaning down to check on him. He slowly sat up, his body trembling, and looked around. He was no longer on the plane. Instead, Lucas was lying next to the charred wreckage of what looked like an old airplane. The air was thick with the smell of burnt metal and something worse. The guard told him that this area was restricted.
That plane had been struck by lightning a week ago, and everyone on board, including the flight attendants and pilots, had perished.
Shocked, Lucas stammered that he had been on that plane. He looked at the plane, horrified by what he had just experienced. He knew he had narrowly escaped the dark fate that had befallen the passengers of that ill-fated flight, the haunting of invisible ghosts. His name was Henry, and he always enjoyed taking late-night walks. There was something about the stillness that made everything feel simpler. It had been this way for years, a nightly routine for him and his dog, Boss. Henry had been a welder for over 40 years. Now, he was living alone on this large farm. The house, too big for just one person, had felt empty ever since Maria, his wife, passed away. Henry's children had moved out long ago, and after cancer took his wife's life, it was just Henry, left alone with the memories. Tonight, after a long day, Henry decided to take a walk. The cool night air was refreshing, and his dog Boss trotted beside him, his nose sniffing the ground as if searching for something. As Henry made the loop around the house, something caught his eye, a flicker of movement in the second-story window. The bedroom window, the one that belonged to Maria. Henry stopped. For a moment, he thought he saw a shadow, something or someone moving inside. Henry's heart raced, not believing his eyes. He hadn't set foot in that room for years, let alone let anyone else in. Henry stared up at the window, unsure if his mind was playing tricks on him, but something wasn't right. Without hesitation, he rushed inside, Boss close behind, and stormed up the stairs 2 at a time. When Henry reached the bedroom, the door creaked open slowly. The room was empty, exactly as he had left it. Henry's eyes scanned the space, nothing out of place, no signs of anyone being there. Henry felt foolish for overreacting, but that unease, that creeping sensation, stayed with him. Something had been there, Henry was sure of it. The next night, Boss's low growl woke Henry from a deep sleep. He sat up, listening, straining to hear over the pounding in his ears. That's when he heard the creaking of floorboards. Henry's first instinct was to grab his rifle, and he moved into the hallway, raising the gun. A dark figure stood at the end of the hall. A woman, her face obscured by shadows, her hand stretched toward him, fingers unnaturally long. Another night passed. Henry came downstairs early in the morning, only to find the kitchen lights on. He remembered turning them off. Henry grew tense and started calling the police. They searched the entire house, even bringing in the K-9 unit, but nothing turned up. Henry could see it in their eyes. They didn't believe him, but he knew something was wrong. That was the last straw. The next night, Henry went back upstairs. He didn't know what compelled him to return, but when he opened the door, the sight nearly stopped his heart. Maria's clothes, which Henry had packed away after she died, were scattered across the floor. It was as if someone had pulled them out. Panic rose in his throat. Henry staggered back, and that's when he saw her. A figure stood in the doorway. A woman, but it wasn't Maria. Henry couldn't make out her face, but she was shorter, thinner. Someone he didn't recognize, and her presence filled him with dread. Before he could react, she ran, disappearing down the stairs and into the night. Henry chased her to the front yard, but she was gone by the time he made it outside. Bosley and Henry searched the property, but there was no trace of her. Henry didn't sleep that night. In fact, he hadn't slept in days. Every creak of the floor, every gust of wind outside it all felt like her, lurking, waiting to return. Henry kept his rifle close, afraid he might actually have to use it. A few weeks later, it happened again. Henry was sitting in the living room, trying to distract himself with the television when he saw her. She was standing in the yard, staring at Henry through the window, just a shadow, silhouetted by the moonlight. Henry grabbed his rifle, his hands trembling, and ran outside, firing warning shots into the air. She turned and ran into the darkness, disappearing once again. The shots had probably scared her off for now, but deep down, he knew this wasn't over. The next day, after Henry had been out for errands and returned home late, he didn't see Boss greet him. He searched every corner of the house, but everything felt empty. But Henry still had one last room to check, Maria's room. He stumbled into the bedroom, the door creaking open. Maria's clothes were no longer scattered across the floor. They were neatly hung. But what Henry dreaded had come to pass. The woman was still there, sitting on the bed, staring at him. Her eyes gleamed, and she smiled a cold, twisted smile. She whispered that she had been waiting for him. Henry froze, shocked. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. That voice, it was Maria's. But something was wrong. It was cold, hollow. Before Henry could react, her face shifted from an indistinct blur to something grotesque, her skin melting into a monstrous form. The skin peeled away, revealing rotting flesh underneath. Her eyes sank into her skull, her mouth gaping in a horrifying grimace. Henry screamed and raised his rifle, but it was too late. She lunged at him, and as darkness engulfed him, her fingers seemed to scratch and penetrate his chest. The haunting of invisible ghosts. Henry slowly woke up with a strange feeling, something rough rubbing against his face. It took a moment for Henry to open his eyes and realize it was Boss licking his face. Henry remembered the last time he couldn't find his dog, but after everything that happened, seeing Boss made him feel more at ease. Henry groaned, his whole body aching as he struggled to sit up. Everything felt too stiff, the joints rigid, and the muscles dull with pain, as if she had actually lunged at him, clawing and piercing into his flesh. Boss whimpered softly, his gaze fixed on the bedroom door. Henry glanced over and saw nothing unusual, but he couldn't shake the unsettling feeling that something strange was inside his own home. Days passed in a vague exhaustion. Every night, it was the same. Boss sat in front of the bedroom door, staring, ears pricked up as if waiting for something. Then, like clockwork, at that exact hour, he would start barking, the sound echoing throughout the house, jolting Henry from his restless sleep. He would get up, gun in hand, and search the house, but he never found anything. The house remained silent, the darkness unchanged. He tried to convince himself that it was just Boss being protective, or perhaps reacting to something normal outside. One night, the barking started again, more intense than ever. He jumped up, hurried down the stairs, gun at the ready, and froze at the sight before him. There, near the living room window, Mari was standing. Her face was gentle, hair flowing in the wind. Henry was paralyzed, an uncontrollable feeling swelling within him. Henry hadn't seen her in years. For the first time in months, He felt a sense of comfort. Boss fell silent, his barking turning into a faint whimper, as if something wasn't quite right ahead. He slowly approached the window. But then, something changed. Henry stepped back as Mari's gentle form began to fade, her features distorting, as if cracking horribly, her joints twisting grotesquely, unnaturally. Her eyes seemed to darken, sinking into her face. Her mouth stretched into a wide grin, revealing sharp teeth, with black slime oozing through the cracks in her face. He suddenly realized she had come, perhaps deceiving him and appearing in the form of Mari's spirit. He knew that couldn't be his wife. The figure by the window vanished, dissolving into the darkness like smoke. Henry rushed outside, desperately searching for her, or it, whatever he had just seen. He circled the house, calling for Mari, as if somehow she might still be there, but there was no one. As Henry turned the corner of the barn, he suddenly felt an icy chill. The world around him seemed to shift. The night grew unnaturally dark. It felt like the darkness was swallowing the farm. He heard a whisper, soft and mocking.
Henry.
It was her voice, but distorted and broken, drawing him toward the barn. Henry pushed open the barn door, and there she was again, Mari standing motionless. The whispers grew louder around him.
Come home, Henry. It's time.
The voice echoed from every direction. The darkness closed in, pulling him to his knees as if hypnotized to obey. Her form began to twist again, skin peeling away, revealing a skeletal grin beneath. The barn door slammed shut behind Henry with a piercing noise, swallowing the faint light of the moon. The air filled with voices chanting Henry's name, full of malice. He stumbled back, desperate to escape, but the ground beneath him gave way, sending him plunging into a deep, cold pit. He landed hard on a damp surface. Henry reeled from the overwhelming stench of decay, and as he looked around, rotting corpses, with sunken eyes, stared back at him. He tried to climb out, but the walls of the pit were slick. The bodies began to move, their skeletal hands reaching out, grabbing Henry's legs, pulling him down. A grotesque figure emerged from the darkness above. It was her again, a monstrous version of Mari. Limbs elongated, her smile impossibly wide, filled with jagged, blackened teeth.
Henry, it's time to join us,
she said. Then suddenly, Henry found himself in Mari's old room. The figure leaned closer, its icy breath brushing against his skin.
You can't escape, Henry.
He felt an unnatural pressure tightening around his neck, and he couldn't move. As his vision darkened, it was slowly taking control of him. The first light of dawn crept over the farm. The house lay still and cold, its windows dark and empty. Boss lingered on the porch, his mournful howl echoing across the silent fields. No one knew what really happened. Henry was gone, or perhaps he was still there, but no longer himself. The deadly farewell. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead as I walked through the sterile hallway of the hospital. I had worked here for years, the smell of antiseptic and the beeping of monitors ingrained in my senses. But lately, something felt different, something that always sent a chill down my spine. My patients came in all ages, but there was one little girl named Tira, perhaps the youngest patient in the hospital. Tira was a sweet child. She often wandered the halls and talked to other patients, though she was mostly alone. One night, while working a night shift, I was doing my rounds as usual. In the empty, long corridor, I heard two people talking softly. It was late, and all patients were supposed to be asleep. I followed the sound, which was coming from room 203. As I carefully opened the door to check, I saw her. Tira was standing near the patient's bed, smiling at me mysteriously and greeting me. But my sudden appearance didn't startle her at all. I reminded her that it was past bedtime, and asked what she was doing there. She replied,
Nothing. I just came to say goodbye to George.
George was the patient in room 203. He had recently undergone major surgery. Though Tira seemed calm to me, I noticed George's face. He looked terrified and extremely pale. When I turned to remind her and take Tira back to her room, she had vanished as quickly as if she'd never been there. The next day, I went home around 4 a.m. after my night shift ended. It was my day off, so I slept the entire day. When I returned to work and walked past room 203, I thought about checking on George. But when I opened the door, I found a different patient, and I was informed that George had passed away the previous day. I stood frozen in the hallway, suddenly remembering when I asked Tira what she was doing in George's room. She said she came to say goodbye. But why goodbye? Shouldn't it have been good night? Something was very strange. Every time I encountered little Tira, I would find her wandering the empty hallways at night, talking to someone, or entering a room. At first, I was skeptical, but I noticed that her presence seemed to coincide with the moments just before a patient passed away. Could she possess the strange ability to know when someone was about to die? Then I searched the hospital records. Tira wasn't listed anywhere. There was no information about her being admitted, and no legal guardianship papers on file. I was stunned. I gradually became obsessed with Tira's story and started investigating her background. My suspicions grew when I learned from a nurse that Tira had died in the hospital just a few months ago after falling down the stairs. However, the nurse insisted the incident was ruled an accident, and the hospital never made it public. My mind reeled. How could Tira still be here if she was dead? I started piecing things together, and a chilling thought struck me. Perhaps Tira's spirit was still lingering here. One day, when I dozed off at my desk, I saw her. She was sitting, crying in my dream. I slowly approached Tira. Tira turned to face me, her pale face and empty eyes brimming with a profound sadness. She said,
I've been waiting for you, Dr. Cooper. You're the only one who can help me.
I stood frozen, the air thick with fear, or perhaps confusion. I asked Tira,
Help you? Tell me how.
Tira's ghost stepped closer, her small hand reaching toward me. She whispered painfully,
The experiment. The experiment killed me.
I jolted awake at my desk, drenched in sweat from what I had seen. It was too real, like a cry for help. I knew I needed to act. I dug through old records, my hands trembling. I found it, just a copy, a part of a plan I'd never seen before. It all seemed to point to a dark secret. The deeper I delved into Tira's past, the more I realized her death was no accident. In reality, it was the result of an illegal medical experiment involving an unapproved drug to test the limits of human pain endurance and survival. Tira was selected as a test subject due to the influence of her adoptive father, a man working at the hospital as part of an underground network of unethical experiments. The drug used on Tira was untested and had horrifying side effects. Tira's death was the culmination of a cover-up to protect the hospital's reputation. One night, while working the night shift at the hospital, I heard strange noises, like a child crying, coming from the abandoned wing of the hospital. The sounds led me down a hallway that hadn't been used in years. My heart pounded as I pushed open a door, revealing a forgotten room. Tira stood there, her figure faint in the dim light, her eyes filled with sadness and pain. She told me that she couldn't leave, and that she had been trapped in the hospital ever since her death. Her spirit was tethered to the hospital, bound to the hallways, unable to move on until the truth about her death was revealed. Tira had guided other souls to the afterlife, but she herself was trapped here. When I made my final efforts to reveal the truth, The hospital management and the girl's adoptive father tried to discredit me, even going to great lengths to silence me by threatening my career. The hallways were empty, the hospital eerily silent. I walked through them, knowing they were trying to stop me. But I didn't falter, and I was determined to report everything to the authorities, ensuring that those responsible would be held accountable. As the authorities investigated, I stood in a patient's room, moonlight streaming through the window. I saw the silhouette of a little girl standing behind me. It was Tira, appearing now in a more peaceful form. She smiled, her eyes filled with gratitude. She thanked me, her voice gentle, as her figure began to fade away. Tira's departure finally brought clarity. The hospital faced public outrage, and the administration was forced to shut down. Her adoptive father was arrested for his involvement in the illegal experiments, and justice was served. Although Tira's ghost was gone, the darkness of the hospital remained, reminding me that the line between life and death, between justice and illegality, is often much thinner than we imagine. Horror menu at fast food store. Alex was working the third shift at a local Wendy's to pay for his tuition. The job was nothing special, just the occasional late-night customer, making things a little more interesting. That night, he spent most of his shift sweeping and wiping down counters. Just as he thought he was going to die of boredom, a car pulled up to the drive-through speaker. Alex set down his rag, put on his headset, and said,
Welcome to Wendy's. What can I get for you?
The car pulled up to the pickup window, and the order was unusually large, 50 chicken nuggets and 10 double cheeseburgers. Alex entered the order into the computer, feeling sorry for his coworker, Brad, who was the only cook on shift. Brad would have to make all of that food by himself. Alex asked if he wanted anything else, but the man remained silent and simply drove up to the window. A pickup truck. The man's vehicle was white, coated in a thick layer of grime on the windshield and windows, with patches of rust and dents. As the driver's window rolled down, Alex finally saw him. The man was unsettling. He had pale, sunken eyes with dark purple circles underneath. He was sweating and looked restless. He gripped the steering wheel so tightly that his knuckles were white. Strange scars ran down his arms, as if something had gnawed on his limbs. Alex tried not to stare and opened the window. A horrific stench wafted out from the truck, a smell like a rotting swamp. The man said nothing. He simply handed Alex a crumpled $50 bill. Alex took the money, trying to remain calm despite the man's scarred arms and the truck's overwhelming stench. One thing Alex had learned working in fast food was to avoid conflict at all costs. He handed the man his change and directed him to the designated waiting spot for large orders. Alex told him he'd bring the food out when it was ready, but the man just stared at him with those hollow eyes. Then, the man muttered something repeatedly. "Sandy is so hungry." Alex quickly told him the food would be ready soon and shut the window. But the man didn't move. He didn't park where Alex had directed him. Alex waited for Brad to start passing the food through the window. But after 5 minutes, Brad had only prepared 20 nuggets and 2 burgers. After a few minutes of waiting, he started knocking on the window, demanding his food. When Alex opened the window to check, the man insisted, "Sandy won't wait any longer." Alex could only nod, promising to hurry before quickly shutting the window. Less than 2 minutes passed before he knocked again. This time, he reached out, grabbed Alex by the collar, and snarled,
Sandy won't wait anymore. Do you want me to feed you to her?
Panicked, Alex shoved him away and demanded he leave. The man growled, jumped into his truck, and sped off into the night. About half an hour passed with no customers, so Alex and Brad sat in the kitchen, chatting. Suddenly, in the middle of their conversation, the power in the store cut out, plunging the kitchen into darkness. Alex and Brad froze, turning toward the noise. He had come back. He stood at the window, no longer in his truck, this time clutching a large sack against his chest. His pale lips curled into a sickening smile. Then, to Alex's horror, he pushed open the window.
Sandy needs to eat.
Brad lunged toward the window in rage. The man opened the sack and dumped its contents into the store. Something heavy and wet hit the floor with a sickening sound. Alex squinted, trying to make sense of it. The horrific sound sent chills down Alex's spine. He pulled his phone from his pocket and turned on the flashlight. What he saw would haunt him forever. It was an alligator. It lunged forward and clamped its jaws around Brad's ankle. Brad screamed in agony. The lunatic at the window giggled. "Sandy's hungry. Sandy's hungry," he repeated over and over. Alex grabbed a cast iron pan and swung it with all his strength at the alligator. It screeched and backed off for a moment. In a frenzy, Alex yanked Brad into the kitchen and slammed the door shut behind them. He dialed 911 as they waited in terror, the sound of claws scraping against the floor and the lunatic's distorted mumblings echoing outside. After 10 agonizing minutes, the police arrived and arrested the man. Yet he still wore that deranged, inexplicable grin. Animal control arrived a few minutes later, sedated the alligator, and transported it to a wildlife sanctuary. Reflection in the mirror. This happened when Mocha was in high school. Her school was an old building, with some parts nearly falling apart. The school had 3 main restrooms that were well maintained, but the last one was different. It was isolated from the other buildings. The floor was always filthy, and out of 6 stalls, only 3 had doors, which were barely functional. One day, Mocha found herself in a desperate situation, needing to use the restroom in the middle of class. Unfortunately, the closest option was that disgusting restroom. Since it was the nearest and she didn't want to test her luck holding it in, she had no choice but to go inside. She rushed toward the old restroom. As soon as she stepped inside, a horrible stench filled her nose, the most disgusting smell she had ever encountered. Mocha hurried into the last stall, which was much cleaner than the others, and tried her best to avoid touching the filthy floor. Afterward, Mocha went to the sink to wash her hands. The restroom was eerily silent, with only the sound of running water. Just then, she heard a faint knocking. Confused, she slowly turned off the faucet. Silence. For a moment, she thought she was imagining things, until the sound came again. She glanced at the mirror, but couldn't see anything. The surface was covered in grime. So Mocha grabbed a tissue and began wiping the mirror. Through the fading haze, she saw something moving. And then she finally saw it. Something pale, something bony. She didn't want to believe her eyes, but there it was, a hand reaching out from one of the stalls, tapping on the door. However, when Mocha quickly turned around, the fingers had vanished. Her heart pounded, but she convinced herself it was just her imagination. But that was when the nightmare began. When Mocha looked into the mirror, she was horrified, unable to believe what she was seeing. In the mirror, her reflection was smiling back at her. But it wasn't just an ordinary smile, it was distorted, grotesque. Mocha's real face was frozen in fear, lips pressed tight. But in the mirror, that was not her. And then, Mocha heard the knocking again. To her horror, she saw her reflection knocking on the mirror, trying to grab her attention, beckoning her with the other hand. It whispered, a faint sound, as if it was coming from inside her head. "Come closer." At that moment, her feet felt glued to the ground. She wanted to run, but her legs wouldn't move. Then, from the corner of her eye, the stall door creaked open, inch by inch, something oozing out from within. Mocha couldn't breathe. The air in the restroom turned freezing cold. Then, a long skeletal hand emerged. Its claw-like fingers scraped against the grimy tiles. leaving deep scratches. But it didn't stop there. Behind her, another sound a leg, a twisted limb. Its head snapped to the side like a broken doll, smiling as it crept toward her. And in the mirror, her reflection reached out, grabbing her wrist. Its sharp nails dug into her skin, pulling her toward the glass. Mocha screamed, struggling to break free from its icy grip. Overwhelmed with fear, her vision blurred. Staggering backward, she grabbed a soap dispenser and hurled it at the mirror. The glass shattered into countless shards, the sharp sound snapping her back to reality. She screamed. The stall door burst open. Mocha ran, stumbling, crashing onto the hallway floor. In that moment, she felt something brush against her hair from behind. In sheer panic, she ran without looking back. Back in class, Mocha tried to tell her friends about her horrifying experience, but they dismissed her, saying she was imagining things. From that day forward, no one believed her. She never returned to that restroom again, terrified of what she had seen. The memory of that day haunted her endlessly. She became paranoid about mirrors, always doubting their reflections, unable to look at them for too long, always needing to cover them up. Even to this day, Mocha does not want to know what she truly saw, but for the rest of her life, she will never forget what stared back at her from the mirror. From that day on, she developed a deep, unshakable fear of mirrors. The ghost train on Christmas Day. It was Christmas Eve, and I was late for my flight. The snow was falling heavier than usual, and the slippery roads turned my usual route to the airport into a nightmare. I had to catch the last train out of town to make it to my flight. Otherwise, I'd be stuck until morning. I arrived at the station just in time to catch the train, which seemed unusually empty for such a busy night. It was an old model, not the kind of train I usually saw at this station. But I didn't have time to think about it. I hurried aboard. As I stepped onto the train, I noticed the conductor. He wasn't the usual friendly face I was accustomed to on my daily commutes. This man was older, gaunt, with tired eyes that made me uneasy. His uniform was dark and worn, as though it hadn't been cleaned in years. The inside of the train was just as strange, filled with the scent of old wood and something faintly musty lingering in the air. The train car was nearly empty, save for a few scattered passengers, but the atmosphere was tense, as if something wasn't quite right. I sat by the window, watching the snow fall heavier, blanketing everything outside. The train began to move, and I felt it sway slightly as it picked up speed out of the city. Then I heard the sound of a child crying, just a faint sob. At first, I thought I imagined it, but then it echoed faintly again, as if coming from somewhere near the back of the train. I tried to ignore it, but it echoed in my mind. I began to feel increasingly uneasy, glancing around again, but no one else seemed to notice the sound, which only made it worse. Then I saw him, the conductor. I asked him if he heard it. He said, "Not all passengers on this train want to be here, but they cannot leave." To my bewilderment, he walked away immediately. I steadied myself and turned to ask him about what he had just said. But strangely, he was no longer there. I stood up and walked toward the back of the train. My footsteps echoed in the silence. When I reached the next car, I froze in place. In the dim light, I could see a shadow. It was a child. He clutched a small, tattered doll in his hands, wearing what looked like outdated, shabby clothes. He didn't move, his head bowed. I asked, "Are you lost?" But there was no response. Suddenly, the lights flickered, and the train lurched forward, shaking violently. Without thinking, I reached out to steady the boy. The lights stabilized, but the train car was empty, completely deserted. I moved back into the aisle, trying to understand what was happening. The other passengers remained still, staring straight ahead, oblivious to the madness unfolding around them. Suddenly, I felt a cold hand grasp my arm, sending a shiver through me. The train shook violently again, and the temperature plummeted. I could see my breath in the air. The train screeched to a sudden halt, and I stumbled, trying to steady myself. The passengers were gone. The train was empty, except for the boy, standing with his back to me. He didn't move, just stood there with his head slightly tilted, as if waiting for me to do something. The doll in the boy's hand fell to the floor. I slowly approached him, bending instinctively to pick it up. When I looked up, my breath caught in my throat. The boy turned, and his eyes were voids of pitch-black emptiness, locking onto mine. His voice echoed coldly in the air. They left me. I panicked, never having seen anything like this before. Before I could react, the sound of crying turned into an ear-piercing scream, deafening and spine-chilling. I lost my balance and fell backward in fear, my vision spinning as the boy stood still, seemingly unaffected. The train doors suddenly slid open. With trembling hands, I crawled toward the exit, desperately trying to escape. I staggered out into the freezing, eerily silent night. But when I looked back, the train was gone, completely vanished, leaving only an empty, snow-covered platform as if it had never been there. I don't remember how I got home that night. Every Christmas Eve since, I still wonder whether the midnight train was real or just a nightmare. Years later, on another Christmas Eve, I found an old article, a newspaper archive about a train that disappeared in a snowstorm many years ago. The article spoke of a missing child whose parents had abandoned him on that very train. It was said that the Midnight Express appears every Christmas Eve, carrying lost souls who cannot move on. I closed my laptop, my hands trembling. I looked out the window. The snow continued to fall outside, and a chill ran down my spine. The Clown in the Tree. This happened to me when I was 14. It was the same year everyone was talking about creepy clowns lurking in random places. The stories were everywhere, but I never took them seriously until I had an encounter of my own. I was sitting alone in the living room. My parents had gone to my grandparents' house for the evening, leaving me home by myself. But instead of feeling free, there was a strange unease I couldn't shake. I texted some friends, inviting them over to kill time John and Emma. We played video games for a while, but after a few hours, we got bored. John had an idea. He said, "Let's go into the woods." There was a forest right behind my house that we usually avoided, especially at night. But it was still light out, and with nothing else to do, I agreed. We gathered ourselves and headed out. Part of me regretted it as soon as we left the house. The forest was dense, tall trees casting cool shade, but we weren't scared. We joked around, tossed sticks, and laughed about nothing. We had been there for about 20 or 30 minutes when we heard something strange. Someone was crying. The sound was faint but unmistakable, like sobbing, desperate, coming from deep within the trees. We all stopped, staring at each other. John was the first to break the silence, whispering tensely, "What the hell is that?" None of us knew, and Emma suggested we go check it out. I wanted to say no, but before I could, everyone was already heading towards the sound. My heart started pounding harder with each step. Something felt wrong, like we were walking into a place we shouldn't. As we got closer, we saw a figure slumped on a large branch of an old tree. It was a man, dressed as a clown. His outfit was white with black polka dots, but it was stained and torn. He wore a black wig, but it was messy, and his makeup was smeared by what looked like tears. He just sat there, quietly crying. John, being the idiot he was, yelled, "Hey, you idiot! Why are you crying up there?" A chill ran down my spine, and I instantly turned to John. telling him to shut up, but it was too late. The clown looked down at us, his tear-streaked face twisting into a smile. His lips curled upward, but it was hollow, as if he was trying to express something through invisible pain. And then I saw it, his hand, gripping a large machete, the blade covered in what looked like blood. We were frozen. He just sat there, staring at us, his smile widening grotesquely, yet his eyes were cold, emotionless. He said, "You won't understand, but when I show you, you will." Panic surged through me, and without thinking, I screamed, "Run!" We scattered, running in all directions. My heart pounded, my feet barely touching the ground as I sprinted towards home. The forest seemed endless, branches scratching at my skin as I ran. I could hear the others screaming, their voices fading as we were separated. I reached the edge of the woods, sprinting into my backyard. I didn't stop until I was inside, slamming the door behind me. Then, I waited for my friends. Emma made it back, panting and pale with fear. But John wasn't with us. We waited for him, hoping he'd burst through the door, laughing about how scared we were. But then we waited, and no one came. We called the police. They came and searched the forest. We told them everything: the clown, the machete, the crying. They didn't seem surprised. It turned out the man we saw was a local. He had been on the run for days. The police said he was a heavy drug user who had killed his wife and left her body wrapped in a white sheet. The next day, they found John. He was dead, discovered in a deep lake in the forest. The man must have chased him while the rest of us ran. I couldn't believe it. John was gone, just like that. And it was my fault for agreeing to go into that forest. If I hadn't, maybe he would still be alive. I told my parents everything, and they promised never to leave me home alone again. But it didn't help much. I couldn't sleep for weeks, and when I did, I had nightmares of the clown standing in the forest, smiling at me with his blood-stained machete. It's been 5 years since that night. I'm 19 now, but the memory of what happened in the forest is still burned into my mind. John's disappearance and the discovery of his body in the lake. It haunts me. No one ever talked about it after the police closed the case. A tragic accident, they said. A drug-crazed maniac. But I knew there was more to it. For years, I pushed the memories down, but recently, they've started to resurface. It began with nightmares, the image of the clown, his twisted smile. But lately, it's been more real, as if he's not just in my dreams anymore. Something is coming for me. I've started feeling like I'm being watched again, just like back then. And tonight, I swear I saw him, standing at the edge of the forest behind my house, staring at me. I grabbed a flashlight, pepper spray, and a taser. I don't even know what I was thinking, but I couldn't sit here, paralyzed by fear anymore. The only way to end this is to go back to where it all started. The air was thick with silence as I stepped outside, the flashlight casting weak beams through the trees. The moment I entered the forest, each step felt heavier than the last, as if the woods themselves were pulling me deeper into the darkness. I didn't know where I was going, but my legs seemed to remember the way. Soon enough, I found myself back at the place where we had first seen the clown crying. Suddenly, the rustling of leaves shattered the silence. I froze. The sound of snapping twigs grew closer. I slowly turned around. The flashlight shook in my trembling hands, illuminating a figure perched on a branch, whistling. It was him. He looked just like before, his white clothes smeared with dirt and something darker dried blood. His black wig was still a tangled mess. He just sat there, staring, holding the machete. The clown tilted his head, his smile twisting even more as he jumped down effortlessly, walking slowly, deliberately toward me. He said, "Welcome back." I was so angry I almost cried, yelling that I knew what he had done to John. The clown's smile faded, replaced by a fake look of pity. "You don't understand," he whispered. "I didn't kill him. He chose it." I shook my head, backing away. His words. When I ran, I remembered seeing John hesitate, standing still. He didn't seem scared, more like mesmerized. And what he said before we ran into the woods, he looks sad, doesn't he? I snapped back to reality as the clown got closer, saying that when it was my turn, I'd understand. His words hit me like a punch. I stumbled backward, tripping over a fallen branch. The flashlight slipped from my hand, flickering as it rolled across the ground. Darkness enveloped me, and I reached to grab it, but the clown's footsteps were closer now. I looked up and saw him towering over me, raising the machete. I pulled the pepper spray from my pocket and sprayed it. He staggered for a moment. But then I heard a voice that sounded like John's. "Alex, you need to leave." I don't know how. I didn't look back at the clown. I just ran. His laughter echoed behind me. Suddenly, I was standing in my backyard, alone. The forest was quiet now, the house dark and still. I rushed inside and called the police, convinced he was still out there. When the police arrived this time, he was there. They found him crouched near the lake, clutching the machete. His clothes were soaked in blood and dirt. He didn't resist when they approached. Later, they interrogated him for hours. The clown believed he was chosen to lead people to the other side. The police dismissed it as the ramblings of a madman. But even then, I knew something darker was at play.